split. Okay. Hi, my name is Heather Hadishel. I am an attorney at Delta Airlines. I specialize in marketing, consumer advertising, and other kind of consumer affairs issues, in addition to doing some commercial work. I am a volunteer with Pro Bono Partnership and have been working with them for, I think, 6 years now. And I really look forward to working with you guys on this presentation. So my presentation is Before You Hit Send, Can Spam for Nonprofits. Okay. Just a little bit of an introduction related to Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. I know you probably are all very familiar with them. The mission of Pro Bono Partnership is to maximize the impact of pro bono engagement by connecting a network of attorneys with nonprofits in need of free business legal services. Okay. Other information about Pro Bono Partnership of Atlanta. In order to be a client, you must be a 501c3. You must be located in the greater Atlanta area. You must serve low-income and disadvantaged individuals and be unable to afford legal services on your own. Okay. You can visit on Pro Bono Partnership, www.pbpatl.org. They host free monthly webinars, including this one for nonprofits. And to find a list of upcoming webinars or workshops, visit the workshops page at Pro Bono Partnership. Okay. Also, join their mailing list at rla@pbpatl.org. Very pertinent to today's conversation. So. Okay, just the standard legal disclaimers. The webinar presents general guidelines for Georgia nonprofit organizations. Should not be used or construed as legal advice. Always talk to an attorney to address your particular situation. Okay, and you can do that by reaching out to Pro Bono Partnership. Okay, so the goals of today's presentation are engaging efficiently with your mailing lists and your volunteers and supporters. Determining when an email communication needs to comply with Can Spam, when it doesn't, and other privacy laws we're going to go through at the end, just kind of a quick hit list of other items you should think about when you're sending emails to your volunteers, donors, supporters. And then also ensuring compliance with the mailing and opt-out requirements that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay. So overview, what is Can Spam? What do I have to do to comply? I always find it helpful when people give me kind of a roadmap before we get started. So the topics for today, what is Can Spam, penalties, what happens if you violate the law, identifying which emails actually need to be Can Spam compliant and which ones are transactional, which we'll talk about that shortly, how to make your emails Can Spam compliant, what does it mean to unsubscribe or opt out, and what are the requirements surrounding that. Best practices for nonprofits, and also just kind of the odds and ends and run through those other privacy and email related restrictions. Okay, Can Spam is the Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act of 2003. So long word, luckily they shortened it down to Can Spam, which is a lot easier to say. The funny thing about Can Spam is though it's intended to limit spam, it doesn't actually restrict you from sending unsolicited emails. So it's kind of funny, we have this system of restricting spam that doesn't actually restrict spam. So, you know, I find it kind of funny. We're going to spend a lot of time doing a law, but it doesn't stop me from emailing you. So that said, I think overall the law is really pretty business friendly. As I said, you can send an email to someone until they tell you to stop. So it lets you go ahead and send that proactive email. You as the consumer always will have the right to say, okay, I'm tired of getting emails, but this gives you a lot of flexibility in your business and where you're collecting email addresses and sending them to new potential donors or potential volunteers. So just to note, this applies, and we'll talk more about this later, only to U.S. customers or U.S. volunteers or donors. I say that because Canada and the European Union also have laws that are far more restrictive on this. So in some ways we lucked out. They have to have affirmative consent in Canada to send an email at all. So in the United States, it's much more flexible and much more business friendly. It applies to emails only, so this does not apply to your direct mail, it doesn't apply to your social media, it doesn't apply to your telephone solicitation. All of those have other laws that apply to them, but Can Spam is email only. So the only place you really need to think about this is when you're hitting send and putting something in somebody's inbox. Okay. It applies specifically to solicitation and marketing emails. It does not apply to transactional emails. And we'll talk about this more, but I think of this kind of as a push versus a pull. So if I'm pushing something out to a large group, that's always going to be considered a marketing or a commercial email. If the person is asking me for a particular piece of information, or they've, I guess, initiated the interaction, it's almost always going to be a pull email, or it's going to be a transactional email. So we'll talk more about this, but for example, if someone wants to send me a donation and I need to respond back to them with a confirmation of receipt, that's not going to be a marketing email. That will be transactional, so it falls outside of CAN-SPAM. Same thing if we're going out and confirming times for volunteers that have already signed up with us, or you're sending out fundraiser confirmations for registration. All of those are going to be transactional, not within CAN-SPAM, which is what we're about to talk to. That said, if what you're doing is sending out a request for donations, or sending out notice of your newest fundraiser and you're trying to get people to buy tickets, or if you are asking for volunteers for your next gala or next 5K, any of those are going to be commercial because you're pushing out the communication and you're asking the customer to do something in an advertising manner. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, you don't need permission or consent to send the first email as long as you meet the requirements in this presentation. Just a reminder, there are some steps we'll have to take to make sure it's okay to send that email. Okay. Penalties for CAN-SPAM up to $16,000 per violation. Every single email at every email address can be construed as a separate violation. So if, and again, this is the worst case scenario, but if you send an email that didn't have an unsubscribe at the bottom, so it's not CAN-SPAM compliant, and you sent it to 1,000 different people, technically you have 1,000 violations. Again, this is pretty much sky is falling. I don't know that I've ever seen a penalty in that range, but just kind of looking at what the law authorizes, it's 16,000 per email. Just kind of bear that in mind. The liability can be really big. So, okay. So starting with a checklist for email solicitations, just to go through the list, a sender of a commercial email will be engaging in legal activity. So this is kind of the safe harbor of things that you can do when sending your commercial or your marketing emails. The header of the commercial email must identify the sending source, destination, and routing information, so it doesn't contain materially false or misleading information. So if your organization, for example, is, Let's Get Fit Atlanta, I don't even know if that exists, but you couldn't have something that said the American Cancer Society as your sender, right? Because it needs to actually identify who your sender is. I don't typically see this as an issue with our nonprofits. Most of the time, you're going to be using your own web domain for your email. So. Second, the subject line doesn't contain deceptive information. Deceptive, for example, I don't see this as much in nonprofits, but get your free $50 gift card when you're actually not giving away a gift card. So basically a bait in order to get someone to open the email. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that your email subject line is clear. If you're looking for volunteers, you'll probably say, we need your help, or we need you to volunteer. So just kind of making sure, and this is really just kind of a gut check. Does your email subject line fit the body copy of your email? So typically when I'm working with clients, what I recommend is that the subject line is probably the last thing that you draft. So you look through, you draft your email copy first, and then you say, what's the most important part of my email? Okay, well, I'm looking for donations, or I'm looking for fundraisers or volunteers. So that's what my subject line is going to say. So it's easier a lot of times, just like naming a presentation. Draft the presentation first and then figure out what the name of it should be. So, the email should include some type of return email address. So if you're sending this from a commercial server, a lot of times the email reply is not going to work well. It's going to go out into the ethos, and hitting reply on that will not necessarily direct that reply to the organization. So making sure that in your email that you include a reply address. And if it turns out that the reply that is in your email being sent is not one that they could reply and get back to you, making sure that's in your email as well. So a notification that this is an unmonitored inbox, for example. is always a good practice. Okay. Again, the point here is making sure that the person you're sending the email to has the ability to come back and contact you, both for unsubscribes and then also just for additional information. And of course, this makes sense if you're trying to get someone to buy something from you or do a fundraiser or volunteer with you. Of course, we're going to want to include the right address to contact you at. So I think in that sense, the law is really just codifying common sense. Okay. The email should contain a clear and conspicuous notice of the opportunity to opt out from future emails from the sender. We'll talk more about opt-outs later. I think for nonprofits, that's probably the trickiest, but also most important part of the law. It's the area that's easiest to mess up. And then it also needs to include a valid physical postal address for the sender. So whether that's a P.O. box or an actual mailing address with a road name, you need to make sure that's in the bottom of all your emails. So one practice that we also do at Delta is we make sure that we have boilerplate print at the bottom of your email that will always include the reply address. It's going to include your physical mailing address and then all the information about your unsubscribe. So in terms of best practices, it's great to have that kind of canned and ready to go before you start sending emails. So all you have to do is make sure it's at the bottom and you're good to go. Okay. So marketing and solicitation emails versus transactional. And again, this is the first threshold that we're going to want to make sure whether our email falls into can spam at all. So as I said, it's the push versus the pull. A few examples of things that would clearly be marketing, solicitation, would need to comply with can spam include donor newsletters, fundraiser invitations, annual giving campaign requests, volunteer requests, anything where you're asking them to do something. Transactional, as I said, confirmation of your donation. In Delta, that's typically going to be a ticket receipt for us, or something that confirms that a customer has paid us money or made a change on their fare. Anything like that where we're actually confirming a transaction that they've requested. Another example would be an annual report. So if I'm a donor and I've given you money, it is okay to send an email link to that annual report that shows what I've done with those funds. And then finally, that, again, transactional confirmation of an event attendance. So if someone has paid you money, it is always okay to send them a receipt. And again, best practice to do so. Because in most cases, these are going to be tax deductible for them. Okay. So just a rule of thumb, did they contact you first? Are they responding to a particular request or confirming participation? Probably transactional. If you want them to do something, probably solicitation. The general rule under can spam is it needs to be primarily one or the other. So you could have, for example, a confirmation receipt, and then somewhere in the bottom in small print under the confirmation of donation, you could say, and if you're interested in joining our fundraiser, click here for more details. So you can include, in some cases, really minor promotional messages in a transactional. The test is really what is the overall purpose of that communication. So, 50% or more, if the purpose is responding to the customer or the donor, it's okay to include that small notice of something promotional, transactional about your organization. Okay. So again, the test I usually use is it needs to be somewhere around 2/3. I think the law technically says anything primarily, but I think 2/3 is kind of an easy standard. So is the majority of the email going to be related to promotion or transactional? Okay. Talking through subject lines. So as I said, the subject line needs to line up with a copy of your email. So making sure, as I said, read the email first, figure out what your subject line is going to be, and make sure those two line up. I included in here just kind of a quick sample. So Nonprofit Kids, Inc. wants to create a contact for their mailing list to raise funds for a new summer camp they want to provide to low-income children this summer. Which of the following would be the best subject line for this? Join us at our summer event. Who's watching your children this summer? Help low-income elementary schoolers in your area, or information about your recent transaction. Okay, so just going through these one by one. Join us at your summer event. If what you're sending this to is parents of kids who are low income and you want them to come to camp, that might be a great subject line for this. But as we said, we're sending this out to potential donors and we want them to give money. Okay. Who's watching your children this summer? Also, again, great for parents of low-income children, right? So again, we're asking them to do something related to the camp to enroll. So this would be a great email of what we were doing, or great subject line if what we were doing was asking them to enroll in a camp that we'd already started, but not great for your donors. Help low-income elementary schoolers in your area, probably a great title for this email, or subject line for this email, because it specifically relates to what you want that person to do. It's not going to mislead them of what the rest of your email is going to be about. Okay. Information about your recent transaction. This is probably the easy throwaway because clearly this relates to a transactional message. It might be great if what you're doing is confirming someone's purchase for your event, but not for Camp for Kids. Okay. Email body copy. So in addition to the subject line not being misleading and not kind of clickbait for what's inside the email copy itself needs to be clear that it's an advertisement. It needs to be clear and just concise, not deceptive. It should include all of the information you need to make sure the audience understands what they're getting or what you're asking for. Generally, this is just a good test of read the email. Does it make sense? What information is missing? When I'm looking at these or drafting an email, what I'll typically do is I'll draft it and I'll send it to somebody who has no prior experience with the program, ask them to read it and tell me what they get out of it. You know, tell me the objective, what do they think they're getting? So on the Delta side, for example, if I'm sending an email about one of our new products, I'll probably send it to someone who's not the product manager and ask them, you know, does this make sense? What am I asking you to do? What information do you think is missing? Again, this is like a reasonable person test. We want to ask, if I'm the average person who's reading through emails and I'm just getting this from you, am I going to know what you're asking for? This, in some ways, falls into a few other categories of law, too. So the Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practice Act also governs whether emails or other advertisements are deceptive, but this is just one area of CAN spam. So making sure, in addition to all these other areas of your email, that it's clear and concise. Just another thing to throw in there, one of the areas I see the mistake made over and over again is ambiguity in your email. So an example I've seen on the Delta side that luckily has not made it into the public yet, but I see frequently on drafting are things like free snacks and drinks. So the question there is whether the word free just modifies snacks or whether it modifies drinks too. So, you know, if I'm the average consumer, do I think free is snacks and drinks, or do I think it's free snacks and then drinks, do I have to pay for them, right? So kind of keeping in mind when you're doing things like describing with the word free or discounted or anything else that's kind of an adjective, being clear what that modifies. I use that just because it happens all the time and people don't really think about it. And if you don't know the product, you wouldn't know whether or not the drinks are free. So just simple, I think it's a grammar question more than a legal one. You don't have to be a lawyer to figure out whether or not the drinks are free, but we'll typically be the ones who catch the issue. So ambiguous drafting. Again, that's something that your average drafter or average reader should be able to catch if they're reading through this. They'll question whether or not the drinks are free. Okay. And just another example on this, including all the information necessary. You know, if you're saying you're giving it fun or selling a table at a fundraising event, how many seats are included? So is that a 4-person table, a 6-person table, 8-person table? That might be important information if you're including a price per table. So making sure all the information that you need is in that email itself. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about the content of your email. We've talked about the to line in the sender and the reply. We've talked about the subject line, and that leaves us with opting out. So opting out is probably, as I said, the most important part of CAN spam. So as I said, you can email anyone. You can send them something requesting funds. That's okay. But if they say they don't want your emails anymore, we have to honor that. Okay. So typically the way that we'll handle that is we'll include an unsubscribe link or an opt-out link at the bottom of your email. And again, when you're drafting your email copy and you've got that boilerplate at the bottom, making sure that that boilerplate includes your unsubscribe link is always the best practice. Again, making sure that link actually goes to either a web form or it should go to a reply address so that the customer can actually respond back to you. I know most of the commercial email servers will have a form that you include. So when I click unsubscribe, it's going to say, "Hi, Heather Hadashell, we understand you don't want our emails anymore." So that's going to go to a submit, "Are you sure?" And then that's going to get transmitted back to the organization. So I know, for example, Cheetah Mail and MailChimp and other major companies that do this will always help you get this link right, and then we'll send that unsubscribed email address back to you, in addition to removing it from their database. Okay. So again, the rule is with marketing emails, all solicitations must include this unsubscribe or opt out at the bottom of the email. When someone opts out, you have to respond to that and take them off your list within 10 days. And I think the background or backstory behind this is 10 days is what Congress thought was probably reasonable in terms of, okay, so we've gotten a request. How long is it going to take us to actually pull you off all of our email databases? So recognizing you might have multiple data or multiple emails kind of in progress, it might take a while for the person to come back and remove you from all of their different databases. So from the point that you get that email submitted as an opt-out, 10 days, count it off. You must also, or you can give them the option of unsubscribing from a particular category of email, but you must give them the option of unsubscribing from all emails that you're sending. So an example on the Delta side is we let someone unsubscribe from everything we send that's promotional, but we also allow them to opt out of, for example, partner emails or product emails or things related to new routes. So we let them kind of decide which emails they want to get from us or none at all. This, again, I think creates a better customer experience or volunteer experience if you let them do this. You might have some people who say, I thought I wanted to opt out of everything, but maybe just tell me about your fundraisers, or maybe just tell me about your volunteer opportunities. So I think this actually is a good thing for you if you create multiple database mailing lists that you can take someone on or subscribe them for. So, you might have one that's just for, if we're going back to the Kids Camp Inc. example, just a mailing list that's for parents or just for volunteers. So, again, the goal of this is to help you keep as many email addresses on your mailing list as possible. So if we can avoid someone opting out from everything, all the better, right? Again, this probably creates a little bit of administrative work for you on the front end. The challenge, I think, is if you have a large database of emails already, trying to figure out how you would handle or break these out in the mailing list can be kind of a thoughtful process. But you could create different groups of emails to send. Okay. Always include your organization's name, address, email address to contact you on your emails. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Always important that they can find you. And obviously that's great for opt-out, but it's also great for contacting you to give you money or volunteer or all the great things we want them to do. Okay. So I think that's actually kind of the overview of CAN-SPAM. Just a few other things to keep in mind. The first one is email addresses from children. So the Children's Online Parental Privacy Act, I believe I've got that right. So COPA requires that if you're sending any solicitations to children under 13, you have to have their parent or guardian's verified parental consent. On the Delta side, what we typically say is we're just not going to email kids under 13, period. Not worth the risk, and let's be real, they don't have any money to spend anyway. So probably not your great target audience. But just kind of keeping that in mind, if you're at an event, bearing in mind who's going to be at the event. So if you're at your kids' camp, maybe not a great idea to collect your email addresses there. But if you're doing a fundraiser and it happens to be a black tie gala, great place to collect email addresses, probably very little risk that your people subscribing are under 13. Okay. Just another throw in here on CAN-SPAM, again, US email addresses, but a reminder that you need to be registered in every state that you're soliciting in. So if you're a Georgia nonprofit, I believe you're automatically, and promoter partner folks, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe you're automatically registered in the state of Georgia for solicitations. Nope, okay, so you do need to register in the state of Georgia.
That's right.
But bearing in mind that you'll also need to register if you're emailing folks in Tennessee or South Carolina. So each of those are an additional requirement on top of the email CAN-SPAM requirements. So don't just assume because you're complying with CAN-SPAM that there's no other laws out there that you have to work and comply with. Okay. And I'm sure Promoted Partnership would be happy to help you with this because I think I've done a few matters for other nonprofits on registering in Tennessee, South Carolina, etc. Okay. So again, just best practices, basically a summary of what we've talked about so far. Again, a lot of these I think are really common sense, but great email practices. Always include a from and a to and a subject line that's very clear and reflects your email content. Always keep your master list of unsubscribes, update it frequently. Again, if you're using a commercial email server, they will send that back to you, but we want to make sure that that hits all of your unsubscribe lists and that you keep that list. If, for example, you need to send something through another server, that applies for your organization regardless of the method or the commercial email group that you use to send your emails. So if you're using, again, just the example of a Cheetah Mail and a MailChimp, your unsubscribe list will have to apply to both of those. So you can't use another email service and think it's okay just because somebody's unsubscribed from your Cheetah Mail. Okay. So making sure you keep that unsubscribe list, update frequently, bounce against all of your new emails. Monitor frequency of opt-outs. If you get a ton of opt-outs from a particular email, again, this is not a legal point, but you might want to go back and look at that email and say, what's going on here? Why is it that a lot of my donors or a lot of my volunteers are unsubscribing from this? So is it a problem of frequency? Am I asking them for too much? Am I sending something for a 5,000 a head fundraiser to a group that is relatively small? So kind of keeping in mind, just from a business perspective, why are we getting opt-outs? So, and then just a plug for some of the professional services. I know some of you use those because I get emails from them. But Cheetah Mail, MailChimp, lots of other groups who can help you with getting your emails out and also help you make sure that that unsubscribe and the boilerplate are all at the bottom of your emails. Okay. Also, just to mention, probably should have mentioned this earlier, if you're sending one-off emails to your board members or a particular potential donor, those really don't fall into the realm of CAN-SPAM. So, if it's coming from your personal email address, I would not worry about all of these unsubscribes. So if you're the executive director and you're sending something to a new potential donor and you're asking them for money, but it's just coming personally from you, really not the objective and the intended target for CAN-SPAM. So, don't feel that you have to put that unsubscribe at the bottom of all your personal emails if you are the executive director. So, okay. That's all I have. Do we have any questions?
Just 1 minute.
Okay.
If I'm sending a volunteer request to a large group from my own email address, not by MailChimp, do I need to include an opt-out at the bottom of my email? Can you repeat the question, please, Heather?
Sure. So if I am sending an email from my personal email address to a large group asking for volunteers, do I need to include that opt-out? I think this is going to be one of those facts and circumstances. If you're sending this to your entire mailing database and your intent by sending it from your personal email address is to get out of the CAN-SPAM requirements, that's probably not okay. If you're sending this to 15 of your personal friends and you're asking them for volunteers, I'm a lot less concerned. What I would probably say is if it's a gray area, come back, talk to Promoted Partnership. We can take a look at the email and give you a good judgment call based on the facts in your particular circumstance. So
great. There was a question about registering an estate. The person said they didn't hear the information about having to register and where they need to register.
Sure. And again, this is one that probably the question is, can you repeat the information about registering an estate, particularly for solicitation? And again, the point of this is if you are soliciting an estate for donations, you will be required to register in that state, and that's a separate registration from your incorporation as a nonprofit. So if you have states that you think you're going to be soliciting in, whether it's you've got a professional fundraiser or you're going to be cold calling, probably a good idea to come talk to your pro bono partnership and determine whether or not you need to register in those states.
And we have another question related to solicitation registration. What if we don't know the state in which someone lives? Do we need to get their full contact information from them so we can identify it?
Again, I think we need a little bit more information. The question was, if you don't know the state that someone's in, do you have to get their full contact information? And I think we need a little bit more information. You know, if you bought that from a large leads database, we would hope that they would send the address, including the state of residence for that person. You know, if it's someone who has emailed you or specifically been asked to be included on your emails, I think we might have a slightly different answer, but would probably want to look at that on a case by case of where those email addresses are coming from before we give a definitive answer.
Mm-hmm. The only other question relates to accessibility of the presentation and the PowerPoint. So if you wouldn't mind just indicating that the presentation and the PowerPoint will be posted on our website after the presentation is completed, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So we will post the webinar and also the presentation after we're completed on the website, so you can access it. So for more information, contact Pro Bono Partnership. We have the web address, their email, and then also the phone number here on the PowerPoint as well. And thanks so much for your time.